Hey everyone, welcome back for another day of BDSG Teaching Artist Interviews. So today we've got Brady Spitz coming in, and me and Brady have had a lot of great conversations in the last year about teaching, about percussion, and about all things music related. And sorry, I should rephrase, it's Dr. Brady Spitz. So Brady is going to come in today, and we're going to talk about many things relating to percussion, especially now that we're in this new style of percussion known as pandemic percussion. So, just to give you a little background, Brady is the adjunct professor of percussion at Houston Baptist University. He also teaches at the Houston Community College, and he's a freelance percussionist in the Houston area. Now, Brady has played with some of the top groups in the state, including the Houston Grand Opera, the Houston Symphony, and the Amarillo Symphony. And not only that, he's also played in the Hawaii Symphony, which I'm super jealous of because I'd love to go out there and spend a week out in Hawaii playing some classical music. So, another thing to note is Brady received his doctorate from the University of Rice in percussion performance, which is one of the best percussion studios in the country. And it's known as not only the Juilliard of the South for its music reputation, but also the Harvard of the South for its academic reputation. So when I say that Brady knows his stuff, I I mean it. So before we go into that, just really quick, before we start this interview, give us a like, give us a share, give us a shout out. Follow us at Band Director Survival Guide on Facebook, Band Director Survival Guide on Instagram. Check out our website, www.banddirectorsurvivalguide.com. And you can also see us on our YouTube channel. And this interview will also be available on YouTube later as well. And before we go right into this interview, just a reminder that our advancement programs enrollment is now open, but it closes September 27th. So please, if you have any students that are interested, make sure you send them over to this great opportunity. I can't stress enough how amazing this opportunity is. Way lower cost than traditional private lessons and way more impact because they're going to get double the amount of time of instruction and they're going to be with an instructor every step of the way for 12 weeks. And some of these instructors, as you can see with Brady, are just unbelievable. So go ahead and check that out. Give us a like, give us a share, and without further ado, here's Brady Spitz.
All right, we've got Brady Spitz here. Welcome, Brady. It's so good to have you here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. So Brady, like I said earlier, is one of our teaching artists at Band Director Survival Guide, and Brady's got a wealth of knowledge and experience, and we're also fellow percussionists. So we hope you guys enjoy us nerding out about all the percussion things. So, so one of the main things, it's amazing because percussion is like a whole different animal from every other instrument in the band. And I was wondering, people have heard me talk about this, but I'm sure people would love to hear you talk about this. What are some of like the major differences you feel kind of separate percussion from the rest of the band?
So there's sort of two big problems with trying to teach percussion remotely, and this sort of relates to how they interact with the band. But so everyone has these technology issues now, right? Like how do we broadcast students and how do we get them to submit assignments? And we obviously can't have much ensemble interaction just at a distance. But percussionists have an added problem, which is amplified tenfold now that they have during the school year when it's a normal year. And that's that they don't have access to all the instruments that they need. So, like, you know, I think one of the most frustrating things for students in any normal year is getting access to instruments that are really too big or too expensive to have at their house, which for some kids is like a marimba, but for every kid is like a set of timpani. You know what I mean? Or like if they're in marching band, like some kids can afford to buy like a tenor practice pad, but almost no kids' parents are going to be like, yeah, bring a set of tenors to like live at the house. I mean, some might, but not many. You know what I mean? So the challenge with teaching percussion on an individual basis becomes how can you tailor your instruction so that they can accomplish things in the time that they have when they're at school, or how can you tailor activities so that they can get things done at home that then they can easily just sort of like transition onto the instruments at school, right? And now that they don't have the school access for a lot of places, it's like, how can we tailor our individual instruction to the supplies that they have at home? I mean, they're all going to have, you know, whatever technology they have, or that the school district is sort of assigned to them. Or, you know, I know a lot of schools are like giving out Chromebooks and things like that now, so that's great. But beyond the technology issues, how are you going to get a kid to play marimba if they have like not even a bell kit at their house? You know, so these types of things are really big challenges, and they separate us from the winds and strings. And I think a way it's fun to come up with creative solutions, but it's also really frustrating sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember I actually bought the marimba right there to the left, the practice marimba, like 3 months before quarantine happened. And I just remember when I was buying it, I was like, I don't know if I should buy this. I don't know if it's a good idea. And then I got it, and then it was just like the luckiest thing in the world to even have an instrument to practice on, because otherwise I'd be just like all the students right now. I'd have nothing to play on. And I think when it comes to these competitive competitions coming up, like all state and all region, how do you prepare for something like that if you don't have access to those instruments? And like you're saying, another problem with, even if they're able to go to the school to practice with timpani, most schools have one set, maybe two sets. So being able to cycle all the different percussionists through, especially at a 5A, 6A school where you've got, I don't know, like 50 percussionists, maybe more.
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to get everyone to have time? At least with marimbas, since you have front ensemble, you have at least more of a wealth of marimbas to move around. But it's definitely an interesting problem, or something we're going to have to solve.
Yeah, and people are coming up with solutions to like varying degrees, but I think it does expose some of the inequalities in the system. And so
Yeah.
I actually think it's good in a way, because it exposes how much we've like weighted the priorities in our musical systems, like our musical education systems, you know, because at least in Texas, some programs will allow kids to just play marimba for a while, and like they don't have to be good at snare drum. And as orchestral percussionists, like you and I both know that like the thing that high school kids and middle school kids are awful at is like tambourine and crash cymbals. And so now they're like stuck at their house. Now they're like stuck at their house, and they're like, oh, what are we going to do? We don't have a marimba. It's like, well, just do this with your hand, and like get better at tambourine when you're in lockdown a little bit. You know what I mean? Like there are a lot of things that like we should be prioritizing that we haven't in the past, that now we might be forced to.
There's some opportunity there to explore other neglected aspects of percussion
Yeah,
playing.
a lot of like able air claps, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting because during the year with competitions and with performances, a lot of times those things get pushed aside, just out of necessity or out of just the busyness of the schedule, and this does kind of allow for an opportunity to really dive into how those instruments work. And since we're both orchestral percussionists, we know all the techniques to make those things sound their best. And it's always one of my favorite classes is the accessories master class. I know whenever I get to do that at a school, I'm pumped up, because I mean, it's amazing how many different things you can do with the tambourine, and how few of them are widely known outside of the orchestral world. So yeah, that's a great point.
Absolutely. It's not just about accessory instruments and things, but I think the lack of competitions and the lack of intense ensemble rehearsal actually gives you a little bit of breathing space for the students to be creative. So things like tambourine and crash cymbals, sure, but also snare drum, or if they have just like a bell kit or like a marimba or something, it's like, let's give them a little bit of breathing room to like explore the instrument and like see what it feels like to have like a tactile connection with it, and try and make some music with it, that's not necessarily focused on just show music, or maybe like a winter concert season repertoire or something. It's like, oh, you can just give them a tambourine and be like, hey, let's like record something, like let's just use like a free looper software and just see if you can like create a jam with a tambourine. You know what I mean? And that type of like, you never have that type of creativity because there's never any time. And it doesn't have to be accessory instruments. It could be snare drum, it could be practice pad, they could bang on pots and pans. but just giving them the space to be musically creative, I think is a real opportunity.
Yeah, and I think another big thing that people always forget about percussion is there's so many instruments to learn. And while the
Hmm.
technique does carry over through most of them, it's still there's still some fundamental differences. Like you just need some time on each instrument, and students generally start falling into one camp or the other early on. Like I fell into the snare drum camp. All I wanted to do was play drums. Like I didn't even want to look at a bell kit for the first. I started in fourth grade because I started on the East Coast,
Yeah.
but like I didn't even want to look at a bell kit. When I got a bell kit, like I was terrified. I was like, I have to read notes, even if it was just like quarter notes, really slow. I was like, I don't want anything to do with that. I'm gonna miss one. Everyone's gonna look at me. You know, the trumpet's gonna glare at me because he's playing his part with me or something. And
Yeah.
I think it's a great opportunity for students to be able to work on some of those neglected areas. Like for me, if I was in middle school, I'd want to work on my mallet reading because I know that was something that I was self-conscious about. Like into college, like I was really worried about my ability to actually perform any sort of mallet piece in a group. And I know a lot of students feel that way, and other mallet players feel that way about snare drum. So
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many technological solutions now to help with like reading rhythms and reading notes and like how to apply that. And, you know, like apps and things that
yeah,
kind of gamify the experience. And so it's like if you have kids doing an asynchronous learning environment, like they have like 2 hours free in the middle of the day, like they might play Xbox for a while, but they also could like play Staff Wars or something for like 20 minutes. And all of a sudden they're like gamifying their reading work and they're just getting better and better and better without even like knowing it. So like there are a lot of opportunities now for that
what
type of
is
stuff.
what is did you say Staff Wars? I've never actually personally heard of that. I'd love to know more.
Yeah, like Staff Wars is like a music reading app, but it's the same. It's the same. It's a little more gamified than something like Tenuto, which is like another note reading app. And it basically just like it gamifies having to read notes like on a staff and learning to read certain like note shapes and things like that. So you essentially just turn it into a repetitive experience where it generates like a note and you have to like name the note or something, you know,
Oh, cool.
these types of experiences. So there's a couple things like that. I like to use a
Yeah.
couple of different technology solutions. So like Staff Wars or Tenuto, Rhythm Trainer is a good one for like new rhythm readers.
Nice.
Sight Reading Factory is a good
Siren
technology
Factory,
switch.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a lot of good things that you can do at a distance that I think, and it's not just kids, but like you enjoy them too because it's like you can set up all the parameters for the kid and just like go
The
and do.
the new big thing that I've been doing with so many students now is like video game music. Like they just
Yeah,
pick out their favorite video game and we just find like the easiest reduction and they've got the theme of their favorite video game and it's a blast. And the music's I mean the video game music has come a long way in the last 15 years.
yeah.
It's really good now. It's like motion picture quality with thematic material
No,
and
it
all that stuff.
absolutely is. It's amazing. It's amazing. You can do that, and you can get students interested in composition. I have a couple of students who've been in like interested in like arranging and things, so they're like transcribing or like just downloading like transcriptions of their video game music and then like putting it in percussion ensemble format.
Yeah.
So it's like a really good way to keep them involved. It's like not traditional percussion lessons, but it I think reflects more of the realities of the contemporary musical world.
Yeah. Well, I have a question for you. So, for percussionists that are just starting out that don't have a background in piano, because I know I had a background in piano, so when I went to percussion, the keyboard is essentially the same. It's just now all the keys are the same color, and you're hitting
Yeah.
them instead of playing with your fingers. But like for a percussionist that doesn't have a background in piano, like how do you get them started? Like how do you get them going on reading notes and kind of learning to kind of catch up with those other students that might already have a piano background?
So I'm a big fan actually of separating how to learn to read notes on a page and how to play those notes on a keyboard. Like I think there's kind of a three-step process for getting someone to play a mallet instrument. Or like there's like a 3-step mental process. Like you have to learn to recognize what's on the page, like reading a map. You have to get that. That's step number 1. And then you have to be able to translate that to whatever that note is on the keyboard and visualize where that note is on the keyboard. That's step number 2. And then step number 3 is to strike that note. And a lot of times teachers end up having kids try and do all 3 at once or do 2 at once and not focusing on one of those solutions. And usually the breakdown in one of those 3 links is what causes students to have a lack of success, which then leads to an insecurity on the instrument. So it's like, if you can, some schools institute this as part of their curriculum for not just percussionists, but everyone, where they have like a 2-week music theory boot camp for their 6th graders, or something like that. I think that's a really great idea, because then they're not thinking about like, this is an A and that's an A, and then I have to hit the A. They're just thinking about that's an A, and they can do that 1,000 times, and then they're strong at that, right? So you teach that skill of like reading things on the page in sort of a traditional format. You can use music theory, like workbooks and any sort of repetitive strategies you want. You can gamify like we were just talking about. And then you can work on snare drum skills to begin with, just to get their full strokes going and make sure they understand grip and stance and things like that. And I try and not overcomplicate that type of things. Like when they strike a marimba, I say like, strike the center of the bar always. Like a lot of people feel very strongly about striking off center of the bar, and there are good reasons for that. Like I tend to agree with them a little bit, but if you have a kid who you're like, hit the center of the bar, they're going to hit off center anyway. So like probability says that if they aim for the center, they're going to hit like an inch in front of center, which is exactly what you want. So you might as well get them moving and sounding good without bogging them down with like a high level of detail right at first, right? Yeah. So just like no edges of the accidental, it's just the middle of every single bar until it starts getting too fast, so they get their hands moving. And then the critical part is that middle linkage, where they learn to visualize where the note is on the keyboard. Because a lot of times students will jump from step 1 to step 3 thinking that there is no step 2. So they go too fast and they make a mistake and they start to get discouraged. So it's like, if you can construct a plan, which I try to do with my students, where they like actually like learn to visualize on the page, or like acquire the note on the page, visualize it on the keyboard, and strike it in sort of like a structured metronome setting. Like you actually force them to go to that like visualization stage for a moment before they strike the note, which helps build reading confidence, not just with eyes on the page, but eyes on the keyboard. And that's sort of a big step that I try and cement with my students.
I couldn't agree more. And what I think is really important about what you said, that's good to acknowledge, is that visualization element changes. Like then they're not just rote memorizing the music, because they're visualizing it. So that means they're reading it and internalizing how to read it and how to play it at the same time. So they're memorizing it, but they're also getting better at reading. Whereas a lot of people will just memorize something really quickly, and then they wonder why it falls apart as soon as they go to perform, or they come into their lesson and say, this was so good 20 minutes ago. And a lot of it is because of that step 2 is not solid. And I think
this you and I have this in common, having done orchestral things and taken auditions in the past, is there's a really big difference between the players who just have like monster hands and the ones that have like a really like solid understanding of what the music is, like what the sometimes what the harmonic context is, what the orchestra is playing. They can sort of visualize the notes going in front of their eyes as they're playing the notes on the keyboard. So it becomes, I talk with my students a lot about like front of the brain and back of the brain types of memory. So it's like a lot of them will practice it until the music is in the back of their brain and they're just like not even like thinking about what they're playing. Their hands are just going. But you really want to have the capacity to bring it back to the front of your brain and sort of visualize maybe the notes on the staff, but you have to have an active, conscious understanding of the music while you're playing it, and not just flip on the autopilot switch. And that's a big separation between great players and like okay players, and I honestly think that gap could be filled if we just like had kids try and do the right thing from 4th grade or 6th grade or whatever on. Yeah,
one of the main things that I love to do with beginners is I know every beginner learns scales and arpeggios, but I do think that I know for me at least, I didn't learn why. Like, why am I doing these? They're just like, they're good for you, you should do them, which is kind of like saying you should eat vegetables because they're good for you. And I'm like, well, they don't taste good. Why would I do it? Just like scales intrinsically at the beginning are not fun for most people. Like, why am I going to do these random patterns that aren't random? But
Yeah.
essentially what I try to do from the very beginning is in everything that they read, I want them to see that pattern. Like, what's happening here? These are all moving stepwise up the staff. And like, where does it start? Where does it end? Like, what is that? And all of a sudden, instead of reading 10 notes, it's like, oh, it's a C major scale. I've played that 1,000 times. Easy. Now I've learned 3 measures in 1 second. And now I can have that mental model, that visualization, that boom, C major scale going to a G major arpeggio and then C major back down. And now it's 3 things I had to learn instead of 35 notes. And that kind of development makes it really boosts your confidence. And it also gives a why. Like, why am I learning these scales? Like, what's the point? Same thing with like snare drum rudiments. Like, why am I learning these rudiments? Like, what is a paradiddle for? Like, why does it exist?
Yeah.
Those kind of things.
Yeah. Well, so the analogy that I'll often use is that like music as a language is a metaphor, it breaks down sometimes, but it's really great in this case, right? If we think about when you learn how to like read and speak and write English, what you do is as a young child, you learn about writing letters. You know what I mean? You learn how those letters sound and then you write them down on the page. And eventually you learn to construct words and then more complex words out of them. And then you learn to string words together into sentences. And then whole sentences can be strung together into larger pages like essays and articles and books and things like that. So when we are creating a piece of music, the very first thing you learn to do is like strike the instrument, like the snare drum or the keyboard or the tambourine or whatever, right? And then for keyboard and snare drum especially, the next thing we learn is scales and arpeggios, or like thirds, or like Clark studies, like different types of exercises. And then you learn your rudiments. And I'm like, that's you constructing your vocabulary. That's you learning to do words and then more complex words. And then eventually you string things together. And this is really common in I'm a classical percussionist, and that's sort of how I conceive of myself, but this is something that's really strong in the rudimental percussion arena, is they can sort of speak syllables that name rudiments, and then you can have that immediately translated to another person without having to write it down. So if I told you like paradiddle diddle 13 stroke roll flamita flamita stop, you know exactly what I'm saying. Like you could reconstruct that like right away. And it's like, that's a really helpful skill. So we want to be able to not just construct like the letters on the instrument, but words and more complex words, and then teach students how to string those words together. So I had a lot of success with this when I was teaching front ensemble stuff, doing a small amount of exercises, but doing them in all 48 major and minor keys, and then going back to do all the modes of all the keys and then stringing them together. So you're like, okay, we're going to play green scales, the first half in B flat and the second half in A flat. And it's like all of a sudden you understand how to mentally manipulate these elements, and then things become way easier when you see it on the page. You're like, oh, that piece of music is totally just like an F major arpeggio up, followed by like a B flat diminished on the way back down, and then an E flat major scale up 4 steps. And then, like we can just speak it out loud and they can write it down.
Yeah, this is huge. And this is one thing every year when it comes to All-State with the high schoolers, all my high school kids, whenever we do the 2-mallet etude, they always pick usually some sort of classical or Baroque piece, usually. And, in that style, you got like the harmonic structure, like dictates the musicality of what you're supposed to do. So understanding what harmony you're playing and where it's going, all the directions are in the music. It's already there. So if you understand what's happening, you understand what to do. And also, like, I remember, I think it was 2 years ago, like it was a Bach flute sonata, I think. And it was just like, it was just seventh chord after seventh chord after seventh chord. And I was
Yeah.
just, a lot of my kids, I was like, remember when we were talking about practicing your seventh chords for the last year? Like here it is. Like you
Yeah.
finally see it. So,
Man, it's such a cool thing. Like I teach high schoolers and middle schoolers and college students, but regardless of the age group, and usually it happens in middle school, there's always the time when you pull out like the first like piece out of the Macmillan book that's in like C major or whatever, and they're like, oh, they're super overwhelmed as a sixth grader. They're like, oh my god, this is like, it's a whole page of notes, I don't even like know. And you're like, no, check it out, like it's going to do thirds up, and then you're going to do a C major scale down like an octave and a half, and now you know two measures. And they're like, what, how did my
yeah.
hands do that? And it's like, you're increasing your understanding much faster. It's not as challenging. And I actually think all the way up to the hardest repertoire in the percussion canon, I think that there are elements like that where it's not as hard as you think it is if you just apply music theory in this way. And that's what music theory class is for. So, that 8 a.m. class that you blew off as a freshman is now like defining the 8 a.m. class that you blew off as a freshman in college is now like defining how you teach
Yeah.
your students, which,
Yeah, it's totally true. Let's see. There's a couple of questions that we have here that were submitted, and one of them is what's your experience with auditions and or like particularly with Allstate, and like how does this stuff kind of shape the way you teach students and prepare them for an audition like Allstate? Like, what's your kind of methodology and process?
so this is like, what's my experience with teaching students who've done Allstate, or like me being
Like
having taught
you've
Allstate?
done quite a few auditions in your life, and how has
Yeah.
that kind of shaped how, like, what from the experiences you've had from doing it in the real world, doing those real world auditions, how has it shaped the way you prepare your students for their all state or all region or college auditions?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things that I learned taking auditions, and just, for anybody that watches and is sort of wondering what experience I have, I was in the finals for the Houston Ballet Orchestra, and I advanced at the Metropolitan Opera audition a few years ago, and I've had a little bit of success in auditions. I was a finalist for the New York Phil Global Academy in like 2015 or 2016. So I've
Yeah,
had a few successes, and I've also had some successes with students. So I've had all-state concert percussionists and all-state jazz band students.
amazing.
Um, and the thing that I try and bring from my own experience into what they do, the biggest thing is timeline, and how they reach milestones in their preparation. Because if you're going to get to All-State, you're not going to get a student who's like a freshman in high school who struggles to play their E flat major scale make All-State, but they might as a sophomore. And so it's like, if you make them aware of what the timeline and what the requirements are, and be really not like rigid about it, but be sort of like firm about like, this is what has to happen at this point for you to have this level of success, that helps. So I always try and back things up in my own audition experience. For me, it's always like, I want to be done, at least a month before the audition, learning everything to the degree of comfort that I want. And then as a professional, I might do just a bunch of mock auditions and a bunch of like mental preparation. You probably know what I'm talking about. Like, go get a massage, make sure you go to the gym enough, and like make sure you're sleeping at least 8 hours a night. So like you're mentally and physically prepared. But for students, what that means is get this material off their plate, so that when they have like a chemistry test that keeps them up till 1 a.m., like they're not stressing about also learning marimba. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I try and have my students done a certain amount of time before the audition, so that they can focus on coming in and getting reps running things, and also playing for other people, which they don't know they're doing this. I mean, professionals mock audition all the time. Students have no idea. I'm just like, go play this for your buddy tomorrow. That's a mock audition. They don't know that's what it is. They don't know that pros also do that. But like, that's what I want them doing for at least a couple of weeks before the audition, and then backing everything up before that. So in my experience, having taught All-State before, at least in the Texas realm, usually the timpani etude is the thing that challenges high school students the most. Whether it's the most technical etude or not, the timpani etude is on a set of instruments that students are least familiar with. They always get snare drum and mallet experience, even four mallet experience in middle school, and they will have timpani experience. But the difference between a junior high level timpani etude and a high school level timpani etude is huge. That jump is like monumental. You know what I mean?
It's
So
insane.
I always have them. I mean, you go from like playing a 2 or a 3 drum etude with no pedaling and some rolls to having like active chromatic pedaling across 4 drums, playing like some of this stuff is like playing like a multi-tenor solo like on timpani. It's a huge lift. So I always have students start with that and then progress through the etudes in sort of order of difficulty, like reverse difficulty, like start with the most challenging stuff first and then make sure they're hitting milestones at the right place to get them ready to go, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. The Timpani Etude this year, as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, I've played that on like summer festival auditions for Aspen, like which is a
Mm-hmm.
major summer festival. That was on their list, I think 4 or 5 years ago. So I
Yeah,
mean, these are serious etudes.
they are. Yeah, they are. That the Vic Firth book is great, man. I mean, I always use Vic Firth. I think number 11 for my kids who audition at college. It's basically a takeoff on the Martin Concerto
Oh,
timpani part.
nice.
But it's just nice and flashy. And a lot of the Vic Firth etudes are like that, where they're used on festival auditions or they're used on. I've seen Vic Firth 11 on some professional auditions. Like it
Nice.
gets used, and so you can do things out of that book that are professionally relevant. But the kids have to know that like this is hard stuff. Like you need to start with the thing that's the most challenging. And I think the younger the kid is, the harder this solution is, or the harder the problem becomes with them finding a solution for it. But it's a really big deal in terms of emotional maturity for a high school freshman to understand that they need to be working on the things that challenge them the most and not repeating the things that they're good at, because that's what you can do is like, you want to have a positive feedback loop as a younger student, but you really need to sort of invert that relationship a little bit and understand that like the hard stuff is the thing you need to be working on every single day, and you're not going to feel good about it for a while. And that's really difficult for like a 14-year-old. That's like
Oh yeah.
it's emotionally challenging,
It's hard
and
for it's
so,
hard for me.
oh god, I know, right? Yeah. I think that's where having a good teacher comes into play. Like having someone who, I mean, like anyone that's in Band Director Survival Guide, and you and I, having taken these auditions, know we can be positive with the students. And it's like they're flailing and almost drowning with this formality etude, and we're like, buddy, we got you. Like you're doing
Yeah.
great. You're right on track. I know it doesn't feel good yet, but you are exactly where you need to be. Like
Yeah.
that's where having a professional, I think, really helps, is to help keep their spirits up when you throw them into the deep end, essentially,
Yeah. Well, that's one of our big philosophies is we don't consider ourselves really teachers as much as coaches. Like even professional athletes have coaches. Kobe Bryant had a coach. Michael Jordan had a coach. And these guys
Yeah,
are at the top of their game, and we're just there to kind of help the student get to the place we already know they could be. Like we already know they can do it, but we're just trying to make them see that they can do it. Because the truth is, like, we can't play that audition for them. We can't
yeah,
practice for them. So we have to show them the vision, and then they can make that into reality. And that's, that mental process is something that isn't talked about a lot at the younger levels, but it's something that's still there. I mean, they're young adults, and the difference grows and grows as you get older, in your mental maturity. But these kind of
hmm
elements exist throughout your lifetime. So
yeah. I think that's right, and I think it also, having those conversations, even with really young students, like I mean, I'll talk with 12-year-olds about performance anxiety and about audition stuff when they do region in middle school. I'll talk to them about like mental preparation and breathing and things, and they respond really well to it. Like, you think that maybe like they're not ready for it, but they totally are. And it helps them. I mean, even kids that are 12 and 13 suffer from some level of anxiety when you step into a situation like that. And I
Yeah.
think addressing that promotes a level of trust among the teachers and students and among coaches and students and things. And it gives the students room to make mistakes and also to be creative and play with their phrasing a little bit, knowing that it's okay to fail and that you're going to support them in where they want to go. So I think those are all important conversations to have, and we shouldn't be afraid about having them.
I couldn't agree more. And also, like, mistakes generally aren't as big of a deal as we make them out to be. You
Yeah.
know, and and I always say this. I don't think I've ever had an audition where I haven't made a bunch of mistakes, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I know anyone that can say that they ever made it out of an entire audition without making a couple mistakes. I mean, it just we're all human,
Yeah.
and generally speaking, the other humans listening, if it's just a couple little things here and there, like it's so forgivable. And honestly, people almost appreciate when you make a mistake because it reminds everyone that you're human. You know, like you're not a
Yeah.
machine. So
I think the goal is, I mean, we're talking a lot about auditions, but I think the goal in any audition setting is like, does who you are as a musician shine through regardless of your mistakes? So like, of course, if you're in an audition, you might like chip a note on the keyboard stuff, or maybe this 4-stroke rough is not clear as it could be. But it's like, is your essential musicianship so strong that it's shining through those couple of little blips? And I think you're generally rewarded. So the question I always ask my students after their auditions is like, don't tell me what happened. I don't want to hear the results. Like, how do you feel like you played? Like, you personally. And if you played to the best of your ability, then we'll consider it a success regardless of what the rankings are. And if you messed up,
yeah,
then let's have like a post-mortem and address like, did you suffer from anxiety and breathing issues? Did you snowball? I had a student who was an all-state player who snowballed on one of his two mallet etudes his senior year and didn't make all-state the second time. And it's just like, okay, man, that happens. Like, you're playing at a really high level and you just had a blip, and it's fine. Like, it's the outcome is disappointing, but the preparation wasn't any less good, and you shouldn't feel any less proud for your achievement. You know what I mean?
yeah. And I think that's another important point to address with Allstate is even if a student doesn't make Allstate one year, it's important for them to see the value in the process. They're preparing something at a really high level, and oftentimes you don't get to do that. You know, you're running through a bunch of music. You kind of, you know, especially in lessons, oftentimes we'll go through a bunch of etudes to improve their reading and give them kind of more of an integrated way to practice the
Mm-hmm.
techniques they're learning in a more fun way. And you know, with these pieces, they get to spend a few months on them and really learn them. And I mean, I have kids that remember their all-state music from 3 years ago. They still have
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
memorized, and they bust it out every once in a while when they're bored. And I think it's important that this is such an act of vulnerability to go to an audition, to put
Mm-hmm.
yourself out there, put your playing out there, all this work you've done by yourself for a bunch of judges. Like the act of putting yourself out there to be judged is like an incredible act of courage. And it's something I always try to tell my students, like, you're going to do this, and that's great. And like, as long
Yeah.
as you feel like you've done everything you could, then you're going to learn. And no matter, you're going to carry that bravery and that courage with you. And
Yeah.
it'll just build, maybe in music, maybe in other aspects of your life, because not everyone's going to become a professional musician, and that's fine.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think one of the steps or one of the techniques that I try and use in my teaching to get the students to the point where they feel comfortable being that vulnerable is when we start learning a new piece of music, maybe later in junior high, or early in high school. Like, let's say they're playing a mallet etude. I'll be like, okay, we've done 5 etudes on 2 mallets up to this point, and I've given you most of my phrasing suggestions for those things, right? But like, on this one, I want to start having you put all the phrasing in. I want you to write it in, and I want you to, and then you're going to come back next week and show it to me, and I'm going to say that like 40% of it is wrong. Like, I'm just straight up going to tell you that that's a bad idea. Like, and then you're going to redo it for the next week, and then you're going to come back and only 20% of it will be bad. But I'm going to shoot you down to a degree for a while, you know? And like, you know, like they, and I'm like, the thing I try and impress on them is like, okay, what I'm giving you is not the right answer. I'm giving you like the depth of experience to know that this is going to work better than this. You know what I mean? So like you come up with your ideas and I'll help shape your taste a little bit. And so then at some point it's just like let them go and let them free, and they've developed their taste where you will actually agree with their phrasing choices like 90% of the time when they do something. And you can be confident in their maturity as a musician where you haven't given them the right answer for 2 years, and they have the confidence to just put it out on the line because they're not just being drawn. I mean, I feel like if you give them all the phrasing suggestions for the two mallet etude and the all state thing, they're going to fail because they're going to be trying to hit the targets at the right time at the right volume instead of thinking about like, this is an idea I've developed myself and this has to crescendo here because I want it to. That's the way I feel it. And so
Mm-hmm.
that roots it deeper inside them. And of course, you sort of taught them the right answer, but you've done it through a process of leading instead of a process of pushing.
Yeah.
And I think that's it's a really effective way to get students to be confident in their own playing to a level where they can take those types of risks when they get to that higher level audition like you're talking about, and then carry that courage forward when they don't become, you know, when they become a mechanical engineer in college or whatever. Like they're not going to be playing euphonium like after a senior year of high school, but they now have that confidence to put their ideas out there because you sort of scaffolded them up to that point where they feel confident in their ideas.
Absolutely. And I mean, someone's always going to criticize something you do in life, no matter what it is. So
Yeah.
it's nice to have a little bit of experience handling those sort of criticisms, especially in
Mm-hmm.
something so vulnerable as a performance. So I couldn't agree
Yeah.
more.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
well, let's see. Do you have anything else you want to add about anything like for teachers right now, teaching percussion, first year?
Yeah. Don't don't sleep on the fundamentals. Like we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation. I I think it's a really good opportunity for kids. The thing that every director is struggling with right now is to try and make their online curriculum seem like a band class or be as close to some type of, but the one thing that's going to be at a huge disadvantage right now is any type of ensemble playing. And so while you may be coming up with situations or solutions for your ensemble participation, I think there's a way for you to use this time to structure your kids into how their fundamental playing works. So like, don't just play scales, play like green scales and Clark studies and thirds and all your arpeggios, and you can do like skip note arpeggios and do inversions and things like that, and do it in major and minor keys. And like, I had a lot of students doing that over all of last semester, like after spring break, like after things got locked down. And they were just like on a keyboard instrument. Now they can play all 48 major and minor scales. They can play all of their like exercises in all those keys. They know what modes are. They know what like arpeggios are. And they're like eighth graders. And so now they're
Wow, that's amazing.
smoking. They're
Amazing.
smoking now. And, you know, some of it's because they have time on their own and you just kind of like give them these information points and just have them go explore. On snare drum, you know, it becomes like a thing where you can just pad out with a student. It doesn't sound like a snare drum, and there's some things you can't work on a practice pad as well, like buzz rolls, but you can do like accent patterns, and you can talk a lot about like downstroke and upstroke patterns and like how flams work. And like, so some of these kids I have, they're going to drop right in, and I think they're just going to zoom right in and maybe out of like the area contests in Texas because they spent the last 6 months like putting all their scales and major and minor in their back pocket, and they've got like these like, you know, they have their whole paradiddle family rudiments like smoking, and they have all these flam rudiments smoking, and so their hands are working. They have not played an etude this difficult in their life, but they're going to jump right in, and they already have the hands to do it. So
Yeah.
like we're talking about with beginners, like separating reading from technique a little bit at the beginning, like that technique stuff, don't be so concerned with like getting reading in front of them, and don't be so concerned about like need to give them like progressive etudes like every single week. Like, nah, maybe give them like 10 exercises and just tell them like to put in time on this stuff every week. And then their hands will outpace their brain. And then when you have an opportunity to come back to get them to read, they're already capable of playing it, you know? So like don't sleep on the fundamentals, because if you can push their fundamental development, like even if it feels like you're not making progress in ensemble, you're making dramatic progress. Like you're going to shoot forward when you come back in ensemble, you know?
Yeah.
Like you teach kids to play the flam rudiments correctly, you come back and your march in the spring is going to sound nails like 2 weeks after you started.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's building on that with snare drum. Like, I don't know, you might have different opinions on the amount, but like, I found there's really like 12 or 13 hand motions, like hand motion combinations that can happen with an individual hand. And with all those combinations, you basically can do every rudiment that's going to be thrown at you. And
Yeah.
it's really cool if you get those students practicing those hand motions. Some of them are very advanced, like a triple stroke invert with the accent on the third note,
Oh yeah.
which is going to give you your inverted flam taps, eventually your invert cheese, all that stuff. But like those basic hand motions are the foundation for rudimental playing. So if you can do all those things very, very well,
Yeah.
chances are you can put it back together and your hands are going to know what to do because they've
Yeah.
individually learned those motions.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely how I like to teach as well. Like everything is like full stroke exercises and like down and upstroke exercises and triple strokes with different dynamic
Yeah.
shapes on them. And if you can do those one-handers strong, and then yeah, like with like regular flam taps, building them off of a triple stroke, like
Yeah.
the stronger the triple stroke is, the better the flam taps go. And when I play flam taps for like a seventh grader for the first time, and I'm just like chugga 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 chugga, and they're like, whoa, and it's like because I can do this chugga da chugga da chugga da chugga da chugga da chugga da, and so
Yeah.
having them
Yeah.
understand that like that's not out of their reach if they just work on those fundamentals to a high enough degree, I think is an
Yeah.
important concept, because I don't want the things that I do to ever seem like they're out of reach for my students. Like my
No.
students will need to be better than me at some point.
I love it when my students start catching up to me on chop speed. I'm always like, this is fun. This is fun.
Yeah.
Like when they start gaining on you, and you're like, see, I told you that one day you were gonna beat me, and I think that's the goal. That's really
I
our
think
goal.
yeah, I think it's super fun too, and it prevents you and I from becoming like that crotchety, like get off my lawn type of old guy, because they keep pushing us and keeping us young. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I've spent the quarantine working on my rudimental playing so that I can keep up because some of my students are getting so good. They're like trying out for DC. They're planning on trying out for DCI, and so I'm having to
Yeah.
learn all these crazy solos trying to keep up with them. So it's been fun. But well, I don't know if I have any more questions. Is there anything else you wanted to add or?
I don't think so, man. I'm happy to be a part of the organization. Like I do feel like, especially during lockdown, it's kind of been like an all hands on deck type of situation.
Yeah.
And we're recording this like at the end of August, but I'm making a prediction now that the fall is going to be a lot online, no matter what
Oh
people
yeah.
say.
Oh
So
yeah.
so I think it's gonna continue to be a situation where we all need to support each other and help each other out. And so I'm just happy to have this outlet to help out where I can. So
Yeah, and we're happy to have you too. I mean, you're such a supportive and knowledgeable teacher, and I think it's such a great benefit for students everywhere to be able to have someone like you guide them and give a sense of community during this time of extreme isolation. So, thanks so much for doing this, and we'll be seeing more of you throughout the semester. So, thanks so
all right,
much.
thank you.
All right, bye.
Wow. I hope you guys really enjoyed that interview. I know it was a longer one, but Brady and I just have so much to talk about, and quite frankly, that interview could have gone a couple hours longer. But we're so grateful that Dr. Brady Spitz was able to join us today. He's one of our great teaching artists for the BDSG advancement programs in percussion this fall. So if you find yourself really interested in finding out more information, go go ahead and head over to our website, www.banddirectorsurvivalguide.com/work with us, and you'll get all of that relevant information to know exactly what's happening in those programs and who you can study with for the fall. We have every single instrument available, including piccolo and euphonium, which I think is so cool. That's one thing I learned from one of the interviews last week. I never knew that you could major in piccolo at an American university, and it turns out that Lily Josephsberg was able to do that at Peabody. So it's just amazing some of the teaching artists we have on staff this fall, and it's such a great opportunity for your students to be able to study with someone at a lower price point with way more value. So I hope you guys enjoyed this interview today. Give us a like, give us a share. Facebook, Band Director Survival Guide, Instagram, Band Director Survival Guide. And also, if you're a director and you're just looking for some support during this time, go ahead and join our Facebook group. We're going to be posting all state recordings, we're posting tips, we're posting recording ideas, and we're just trying to form a community that is all about support. So please stay tuned for the next interview, going to be coming out later this week, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks so much.